right, Genesis 34. We have a daughter of Jacob get defiled. We have sons of Jacob taking matters into their own hands and killing a bunch of people. This chapter in the Bible sort of leads me to believe that it wasn't made up. I mean, if you wanted to make up stuff and want to make up a religion, you wouldn't put this chapter in here. I mean, what's the point? This is God's plan of salvation being worked out, and we have all this crazy stuff happening. So, it's interesting. Hopefully you read it. We're going to go through it, but there's a lot of detail in here. And so you wonder, well, why is all this detail in here? But there's no, this is what it means. God doesn't show up and say, this was wrong and this was right, or you should have done this. It really, it's sort of left to the reader to figure out what the lessons are. I'm not sure totally what it's about. I had some questions when I was done. I have 5 questions. Number 1, is this teaching us that we shouldn't live next door to Christians? 2, or non-Christians, sorry. Maybe both, I don't know. Number 2, fathers, protect your daughters or don't let them go out of the house. Number 3, don't use religion to get revenge. Number 4, defend your family's honor or, I don't know, don't defend your family's honor. Number 5, if you're in charge of your family, then be so. So anyway, there's all these questions I had as I read it. So why don't we look at this chapter. If you have your Bibles, take it out, have a look. We'll see what this is about. Chapter 34, verse 1. Now Dinah, the daughter Leah had born to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land. So we need to do a little backtracking here. Last week we looked at chapter 33. Pastor Jim led you through that. If you go back to verse 16, remember Jacob had fled from his home. He went north. He went to where his grandfather Abraham first heard the voice of God telling him that there's a land I want you to go. I'm going to bless you. You're going to be a blessing to the nations. So Jacob ran there. He spent a lot of years there, got a wife, a bunch of kids. Then God said, I want you to go back home. And then remember he met Esau, and Esau came out with all these men, and he was afraid that Esau remembered how he had tricked him years before and wanted to get revenge. But they have kind of a reunion, although here at the end of chapter 33, it's like Esau is wanting to help, wanting to go along, and Jacob is like wanting to do his own thing. So in verse 16 of chapter 33, we read, so that day Esau started on his way back to Seir. Jacob, however, went to Succoth, where he built a place for himself and made shelters for his livestock. That's why the place is called Succoth. After Jacob came from Paddan Aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan and camped within sight of the city. So this city, Shechem, was sort of on the trade route. There was Egypt, was a mighty power, and then everything going north, Babylon, Assyria, those were the mighty powers. And there was a trade route that went right through here. So Jacob found the wealthy city where all the trade was coming through, and he parked and put his tent right there. For 400 pieces of silver, he bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, a plot of ground which he pitched his tent. There he set up an altar and called it to Eloth Israel. So he's trying to follow God, but he's still, and we'll come back to this, he's still, looking out for his own interests, looking how he can, the first thing he does is build shelters for his livestock. And commentators wonder if this is what God had in mind when he said, go home. Bethel was the place that God had spoken to him. And indeed, in the next chapter, God specifically tells Jacob to go to Bethel. But instead, Jacob takes his family to kind of like the Chicago of that area, of that era. and there's a lot of the world happening there, and we're going to see that trouble does happen. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, who had been born to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land. We don't know if Dinah was the only daughter. It's the only daughter we know about. There's 11 sons and one daughter, as far as we know. The 11 sons, have each other to do stuff with, but Dinah didn't. So she's seeking friendship, as most people do. Verse 2, when Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, the ruler of the area, saw her, he took her and violated her. His heart was drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob, and he loved the girl and spoke tenderly to her. And Shechem said to his father Hamor, get me this girl as my wife. So the first little, possible faith lesson here is, or at least the question is, where should you live? Should you live next to the world or not next to the world? Or how close to the world should you get? This past week, we were up north, and we were driving down the road, and one of those Amish buggies was coming at us, one of those black buggies, And as it was coming and we passed, I sort of, you want to see what life is like in the buggy. And I looked inside, and the father had his head back, and he was singing as loud as he could. And there was one of his kids next to him, and then two kids in the back seat. And they were all just singing as loud as they could. And as we, when we just zoomed past, and I thought, maybe that's what life is really all about. What could be a better picture than the family going down the road in a buggy, singing to their heart's content? And I thought, maybe we're missing it. The Amish literally do isolate themselves from the world. They live in their own communities. They don't drive cars because they don't want to get too far from their neighbors, because they want to depend and have community with the people around them. They don't just get in the car and drive where they want to go. They have to actually deal with the people around them. So is that what we should do? Should we isolate ourselves? Or are we called, like in the New Testament, where it says to go and make disciples? Do we go? Do we pitch our tent in Shechem? Or do we go outside of Shechem? Or do we have nothing to do with Shechem? That's what you end up wondering. Well, verses 2 and 4, Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, the ruler of the area, saw her and took and violated her. And then verse 3, his heart was drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob, and he loved the girl, and he spoke tenderly to her. And all throughout this chapter, it really seems that this guy, Shechem, really did love Dinah. I mean, he's not a love him and leave him kind of guy. He wants to be committed to this girl. He really does love her. But on the other hand, he violates her. So it's like, what's the deal? So I think the second faith lesson, or the possible second faith lesson, is to you young girls. You have to understand something about men. Men, I think, in general, truly want to treat you with love and respect. They want to speak tenderly to you, but they also have physical needs like a lion. There's something, they're like a lion, and sometimes you can tame them, but you have to have a chair between you and the lion. So that's what I'm recommending young women. If you go out on a date, just bring a chair, and always have the chair between you and the lion. You can look at the lion, you can touch the lion on the head, but don't get too close. Now, I'm joking around, but in some sense, that's, and young men, I know you want to respect women, and you want to respect the person that you're with, but sometimes your physical needs take over, and you lose some of that. And so the goal then is to not put yourself into places where you lose control. There always has to be a chair in the room. Take your mom and dad on the date with you, something. Go on double dates. I think that's one of the lessons here. All right, number 5, verse 5. When Jacob heard that his daughter Dinah had been defiled, his sons were in the fields with his livestock. So he kept quiet about it until they came home. And this theme is going to sort of go through the rest of this chapter. He kept quiet about it. Verse 6. Then Shechem's father, Hamor, went out to talk with Jacob. Now Jacob's sons had come in from the fields as soon as they heard what had happened. They were filled with grief and fury because Shechem had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, a thing that should not be done. But Hamor said to them, my son Shechem has his heart set on your daughter. Please give her to him as his wife. Intermarry with us. Give us your daughters. Take our daughters for yourselves, and you can settle among us. Then the land is open to you. Live in it, trade in it, acquire property. Then Shechem said to Dinah's father and brothers, let me find favor in your eyes, and I will give you whatever you ask. Make the price for the bride and the gift I am to bring as great as you like. So he truly loved her. And I'll pay whatever you ask. Only give the girl as my wife. All right, so from this verse on, all of a sudden Jacob is absent. I don't know whether he walked out of the room or what is going on, but it sort of goes back to verse number 5, where he kept quiet. And I don't know what happened to him, because all of a sudden the rest of the chapter, or the bulk of it, Jacob is not aware of anything now that happens. He sort of steps out of it. So, where are we? Verse 13. Because their sister Dinah had been defiled, Jacob's sons replied deceitfully as they spoke to Shechem and his father Hamor. So now Jacob is out of the picture. They said to them, we can't do such a thing. We can't give our sister to a man who is not circumcised. That would be a disgrace to us. Now, circumcision was the sign that God had given Abraham, the sign of the covenant, of God's promise to Abraham, but also a sign of Abraham's commitment to God. It symbolized not only your life, it was like a circle, not only your life, but your future. Your offspring is dedicated to God. So it's really a symbol of God's grace and his love to his people and their response back. But these brothers are going to use this symbolic symbol of grace as a means of war. We will give our consent to you on one condition only, that you become like us by circumcising all your males. Then we will give our daughters and take your daughters for ourselves. We'll settle among you and become one people with you. But if you will not agree to be circumcised, we'll take our sister and go. Their proposal seemed good to Hamor and his son Shechem, which is really weird. The young man, who was the most honored of all his father's household, lost no time in doing what he said because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. It almost sounds like Jacob's love for Rachel. Worked 7 years, seemed like a day. So Hamor and his son Shechem went to the gate. Okay, in those days, a gate had little rooms, and in those little rooms, sort of the government of the city took place. So Hamor and his son Shechem went to the gate of their city to speak to their fellow townsmen. These men are friendly toward us, they said. Let them live in our land and trade in it, and the land has plenty of room for them. We can marry their daughters, and they can marry ours. But the men will consent to live with us as one people on only one condition, that our males be circumcised as they themselves are. And, so this is a big sales pitch, and they're going to have to throw a little more into it than that. So they do. Won't their livestock, their property, and all their animals become ours? So let us give consent to them, and they will settle among us. So he's appealing to commerce. He's appealing to, you'll make some money. And remember, Shechem is on that road. It's on the road where people make a lot of money. So that's what the town is really all about. So they're appealing to the very thing that everyone likes. Verse 24, all the men who went out of the city gate agreed with Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male in the city was circumcised. 3 days later, while all of them were still in pain, 2 of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and attacked the unsuspecting city, killing every male. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. The sons of Jacob came upon the dead bodies and looted the city where their sister had been defiled. They seized their flocks and herds and donkeys and everything else of theirs in the city and out in the fields. They carried off all their wealth and all their women and children, taking as plunder everything in their houses. So they responded in revenge, and they used this symbolic symbol of God's gift as a means to trick and to harm these people. So finally, Jacob ends up coming back into the story. Verse 30. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, and I want you to notice how many times he says me or I. You have brought trouble on me by making me a stench to the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the people living in this land. We are few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed. How many times? Okay, so a lot of me, but then notice this is how the chapter ends. But they, the brothers, replied, should we have treated our sister like a prostitute? And then that's the end. I mean, what did Jacob say? I don't know. What did God say? I don't know. I mean, it's like we have all this detail of all this story, but we don't have the parts that would go like, and so this is the point. Was God angry at the brothers, or was he not angry at the brothers? Did Jacob, after the brothers said, well, what should we have done? Did Jacob say, I guess you're right? Did he punish them? Or what happened after this? And then the next story, God comes to Jacob and says, you got to go to Bethel. And so that's the end of the story. So what is this all about? So that's what I've been thinking about all week. I don't know what you've been doing as you read that. Maybe you've been thinking the same thing. What's the point here? Why is this chapter in here? Why do we have to deal with this whole thing in a nice family church like what we have? Maybe some of you didn't even read it to your kids because who knows what they're going to say, and then you wouldn't know what you're going to say, and so you just skip the whole thing, which I've done before too. So anyway, after praying and thinking about it a long time, I think there's all these little pieces and parts, but I think all the little pieces and parts go under a bigger theme. I think there's a theme that covers over this whole thing, and I think it has to do with Jacob. If you show the slide, okay, Jacob. I think this whole chapter is about Jacob's negative example in terms of leading his family. And the first thing that I want you to note is Jacob grew up in a relationship-poor family. Remember, if we go back a number of chapters, he grew up and he tricked his brother or stole in some ways his brother's birthright for a pot of soup because his brother was hungry. Then later on, his mom came with a scheme of tricking his blind father and his older brother out of the inheritance. And then the older brother wants to kill him, so he has to run. So he grew up in this sort of dysfunctional family. He goes to his uncle Laban, who tries to cheat him. He's got these wives. Anyway, number 2. Jacob did little to create marriage harmony. Okay, so he gets 2 wives, and 2 more are added, but he's like not in control. The wives are bickering and fighting, feeling unloved, and really we don't read a thing that he did to make his marriage a better thing. Number 3, Jacob seemed more interested in money than his family. When it came to the whole marriage thing and having kids, he just sort of went with the flow. He didn't take an active part. It seemed like the wives were in charge of that whole thing. But when it came to making money, all of a sudden, he got, busy. He made a deal with his uncle Laban, and he'd get all the speckled sheep, and so he cut things, and he tried to manipulate the sheep so that he could make some money. When they ran away, remember he divided his wealth into 2 groups, and when he explained why he was doing that, it's like, well, if Esau comes and destroys one, we'll still have the other. It's like my stuff. I'm going to try to hang on to it as best I can. Instead of going to Bethel, where all there was a rock that he put up because he had a dream some years ago where God was, ascending and descending on a ladder to heaven. Instead of going there, he goes to Shechem. Why Shechem? Because it's on the trade route. And the first thing he does when he gets there is build shelters for his sheep. It doesn't say, and he built a shelter for his wives and kids. No, the sheep. That's what I'm into. Next, Jacob allowed foreign gods in his household. Remember when they left Uncle Laban? Remember Rachel, she stole what? His foreign gods. And then we don't hear a thing about Jacob doing anything with that. And then in the next chapter, that's the first thing that Jacob does. Verse 2, Jacob said to his household and to all who are with him, get rid of the foreign gods you have with you, purify yourselves and change your clothes. But up to that point, they were just there. So it was sort of this syncretistic kind of thing. Number 5, Jacob did not go to where God told him. God told him to go home, and instead he settles in Shechem. Number 6, Jacob did not have an eye out for his daughter. Right? I mean, they go to this place. She has no friends, and then she just goes off to the city. 7, Jacob was silent in the family crisis. So the family is in crisis. The daughter has been stolen. She's in these foreign people's homes, and what does he do? He's like in denial. I don't know. He was sulking in the field. I don't know what he was doing. But he just sort of left the family to figure it out for themselves. And then number 8, Jacob blamed his sons for his own lack of leadership. So the sons didn't know what to do. Their father didn't come up with a plan. So they came up with their own plan. And when they did their plan, all of a sudden Jacob shows up and says, what kind of stupid plan was this? Does it sound like anyone's father here or anything? You ever had that experience? You ever do that with your kids? So it was just a lack of leadership. So I looked at this and I saw all these things and I thought, wow, this is one big negative chapter. Aren't you glad you came this morning? So I thought, let's just turn all these 8 into something positive. So if you go to the next slide there, Dan. Taking charge of your family. So Jacob came from a relationship-poor family. Well, why not focus on creating a relationship-rich family? And how do you do that? What is the number one thing that you need to happen in a relationship-rich family? Talking, listening repeatedly. Talking, listening repeatedly to each other, and talking and listening repeatedly to each other and God. That's why we do this Bible reading thing all the time. That's why we have these songs. We're trying to help you have experiences in your own home where you're talking and listening about the important things of life. You know what we're trying to do? We're trying to give you a buggy that you can go down the road and sing your heart out with your kids. That's what it's about. Focus on creating a relationship-rich family. Number 2, focus on creating a great marriage. How do you do that? Talking, listening repeatedly. Same thing. You got to have times of, and in order to have that, you have to have habits of talking, listening repeatedly. Do you have habits? Do you have these special times that you sit down together, maybe at breakfast or in the evening? Or do you just come home, turn the television on, everyone does their own thing? This is what most married couples do. They live their busy lives, they go their own directions, they do their own thing, and then after a couple of years of totally ignoring each other, they go on a cruise for a week. And all of a sudden, with one cruise, 1 week, they're supposed to make up for 2 years of not talking and not listening. Doesn't work well. Number 3. Put God and family before money. Now, most people will say that they go to work and they do all that they do to make money for their family. That's what they say. But money is so What is so intriguing about, or enticing, I guess that's the word. What is so enticing about money? Is it the stuff you can buy with it? I think what's enticing about money is it's concrete. It's like, if you played basketball and you took the hoop away. You're trying to take the ball from me, I'm trying to take it from you, but we don't do anything with it. I don't know who's winning. I don't know who's winning. And after 10 minutes, we just walk away because there's no game. But with the hoop there, you throw it in, and now we have 2, and you have 0. And then and it goes back and forth, and we look up at the thing, and we go, oh, that's the score. Oh, we're just a little behind. And that's what money is like. Money is like a score. And it's very concrete. Did you make money or didn't you? Did you make more money this year than you did last year? You know how you know? If you paid more taxes, then you made more money. So don't complain about your taxes if you had to pay a lot. That means you made a lot of money. But it's very concrete, and because of it, it's an addictive thing. And you can say overall, I do this for my family, but you can ignore your whole family to do this, to say you're doing it for your family. Is your family really first? Is the money really subservient to the cause of your family and helping others? Number 4, make God and His kingdom cause number 1 in your life. God and His kingdom is cause number 1 in your life. Not your kingdom, but His kingdom. Number 5, live where God calls you to. So here's that question. Is this chapter telling us we shouldn't live next to Shechem? Should no one live next to Shechem? Or even in Shechem? Remember, Shechem is this worldly place. It's the center of commerce. It was on the road of money and opportunity. In some ways, the United States is like that. We live in Shechem. The whole country is Shechem. Should we move? Should we go somewhere else? So is this chapter saying you shouldn't live next door to a non-Christian? On one side, we have people who don't go to church at all. On one side, we have people that do. Should we get them to move, or we have to move, or what do we do? You think that's what this is about? Should we go Amish? It'd be fun to do for a week, wouldn't it? You know what I like about the whole Amish thing is? You know what the number 1 thing I like about it? No air conditioning. You ever go downtown Grand Rapids and you see old houses? What do they have on the front of them, each one? A porch. Why do they have a porch? Because in the summer, inside those houses, without air conditioning, it's like 105 degrees. So at 5 o'clock every evening, where were people back in the day? Out on their porch. And who else was out on the porch? Well, everybody. So everybody talked, and there was all this stuff. So if you go by Amish land at 5 o'clock at night, 6 o'clock at night, you know where everyone is? They're outside, playing ball, playing catch. They're doing something. And where are we with our air conditioning? In the house, watching TV, doing Netflix, playing video games. Yeah. Live where God... No, we're still going to be on number 5 here a little bit, Dan. I don't think this chapter is about, not living next to Shechem or in Shechem, because obviously Jesus spent His time with His 12 disciples. So He had His core of people that supported Him, but He went out, and He went everywhere. He spent time with the sinners and the tax collectors and the people. In fact, He got in trouble for all of that. So we're called to do that too. We're called to go and make disciples. I think the point here is not whether He pitched His tent next to Shechem or not, or in Shechem, or He went to Bethel. I think the point here is He didn't go where God called Him to go. And so for you, the question is not, do you live here or you do live there? The question is, are you living in the place God has called you to live? And you might be like, well, I don't know. Does God do that? Does God care where you live? Yes, God cares where you live. God has chosen you as a blessing to the nations, and He's plopped you somewhere, and He has something in design for you where He wants you to be, where He wants you to be a light in this dark world. So are you called to the place that you're in? I don't know. Even churches, when people join churches, when people join churches, they tend to say, well, I like this church because I like this or I like that. But what we need to say is, I feel called to this. You might not like it at all. You know what? I really hate this church. But I feel God is calling me here. This church has all kinds of problems and needs. I personally would like to go somewhere else. But God has called me here. It's about what you've been called to do. So we did this with schools. I was raised in a Christian school. My wife was raised in a Christian school. But when we moved to Vancouver, we were planting a church. And all the people we were reaching went to the public schools. So we felt called to go to the public school. So that's what we did. And then for a few years, we felt called to teach our own kids. I did a little homeschooling. That was fun. And then when we came here, we felt called to put them in the Christian school. And there were reasons behind all of that. Because God had a different purpose for us and our family. When we came here to Pathway, we felt called here. No one in my family wanted to go, by the way. Especially the kids. They did not want to go. They were of the age, they had all their friends in Chicago. They did not want to come here. But I felt that God was calling us. So I ignored what they wanted and experienced a lot of grief for it. But I felt God was calling us. And sometimes that's what it is. God calls you sometimes to things you don't even want to do. So I think that's what this is. It's not about where you live or who you live next to. It's where you feel God is calling you. Number 6, protect and prepare your sons and daughters for the world. I think Jacob, his focus was on money and his flocks and his herds, and he wasn't thinking about his kids. And, in all the stories before, Abraham was concerned about Isaac and who he would marry, and then Isaac was concerned about Jacob, and that's why he got sent to his uncle Laban. And now Jacob isn't really thinking about this. Why isn't he thinking about his own kids and who they're going to marry and what's going to happen? Protect and prepare your sons and daughters for the world. You'd like to isolate them. Jacob had one daughter, and the whole thing starts out, and she went out into the land. And it would be like, he should have stopped her right there. But what is she going to do? Sit at home? That's what you'd like to do. You'd like to have your kids sit at home. But today, it's impossible. If you have the internet, the world is in your house. The whole world is in your house. And if your kids have their own internet device in their own room, they can go anywhere in the world without you knowing where they're going at all. And even if you ban the internet from your home, they all have friends. They just have to buy a 50-cent ice cream cone at McDonald's. They can just sit there for hours. The world is here. Every single tent is right next to Shechem. You can't escape it. So teach your kids. Teach your kids about the world. Parents, teach your daughters about men and what men are like, the good and the bad. They need to know these things. They need to know what's safe and what isn't safe. They need to know what is compromising and what isn't compromising. And they need to be taught early. Pastor Jim and Jeannie have a course that they teach every year about this kind of thing. And 1 or 2 or 3 of you show up every year. I don't know why you all should. If you have a kid, you should be there. This is like parent central number 1. You read books about it, whatever it takes. This is your role to prepare them, and don't wait until the trouble comes home. You got to do it early and often, again and again and again. Number 7, speak up, take an interest in the lives of the people around you. So in this whole story, Jacob is there, he's silent, he doesn't say anything to the very end when it's too late. He doesn't take an interest. He doesn't seem to be involved. He wasn't involved in his marriages. He wasn't involved now with the kids and what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. He's just, it's like denial. And I can see that. You know, when your kids start growing up and they start getting into things and trouble, in some ways, you know, when the phone rings, you don't want to pick it up. I would just rather not know what they've done. You know, sometimes our kids, we have 4 boys, and they'll get together and they'll start saying some of the things that they did that we didn't know about. And part of us just likes to not know. We don't really want to know what horrible parents we were, you know, and the things we let you do or didn't even know that you were doing. You want to be in denial about it. I remember this family that came to our church plant in Vancouver, and they had 3 boys at the time, and they joined the church. They were from a traditional church, and they joined the church plant because their kids were sort of, you know, bored with church, and they weren't paying attention, and so they brought them to this new church that had different music and so on, and they were hoping that their kids would, like, you know, get with the program. And I could see over the years that they were, you know, some of them were sort of drifting away. And so I remember being somewhere, and I asked the mother once, I said, so where do you think your son, I forget his name now, where do you think he is in terms of spiritual things? She said, well, I don't know. I said, well, haven't you talked to him? No. Well, why not? I'm afraid of what he might say. I said, well, being afraid of what he might say doesn't change what he's thinking already. I mean, it's a reality, and whatever he's thinking is, it is what it is. And you just don't know. Yeah, I don't really want to know. I remember thinking, what? How can you not want to know? But I can see that. I'd rather not know that my kid doesn't believe the stuff that we believe. And so we put our head in the sand, and we just don't want to think about it. Instead of taking responsibility and finding out where they're at, talking. In family situations, brokenness in the family, we just sort of let it go. If we bring it up, if we talk about it, or hurt in the past, things that went on in our childhood, we don't want to bring it up now. You know, we're just going to stir a hornet's nest. People are going to get angry. And so we just want to go in denial and just ignore it. But then all kinds of brokenness happens in the family system, and everything. It just keeps going because we don't dare do something about it. We don't, we just stay silent instead of saying something. Maybe we have to say something. Speak up. Take an interest in the lives of the people around you. And number 8, take responsibility for what is happening around you. So Jacob was silent. He had his head in the sand. And then, as often what happens is bad stuff happens because you didn't, dare do anything, didn't dare say anything. And now bad stuff starts happening, and you end up blaming everyone around you. Well, how could you do this? How could this happen? How is this, kid comes home late and you ream them out, but you didn't pay the price early on. You didn't develop the relationship early on with your son or with your daughter. And when you saw signs of trouble, you didn't want to deal with it, so you let it go. And then things snowball, and then it explodes. A lot of times when we get angry at our kids, when as parents we're like incredibly angry at them, you know who we're really angry at? At ourselves for dropping the ball somewhere. It's like instinctively we know. We could have done better. We should have done better. And I'm so angry at you because I didn't do it right. It's like coming home, angry, and then you kick the dog because you want to kick somebody. Take responsibility for what's going on in your family. And And in this case, I think it's sort of a side note. These boys used religion as a means of settling scores. And we saw that in the Middle Ages with the Inquisition. We see that with terrorism today. People using religion as a way to settle things. And they use actually the thing that's supposed to be about love as a hate mechanism. So these boys took the sacrament that was a symbol of God's love to us, and they used it as a symbol of getting revenge for their sister. So in the end, I think this chapter is really about taking responsibility for the leadership that you have. So you are all, some of you are parents, fathers and mothers with children. You take responsibility for that. Some of you are just in a family. You have your role too. Some of us are outside of the family. We're on our own, but you have family connections, and you have a place in your family. Lead. Don't stay silent. Care about those around you. Next week, we're going to deal with Jacob coming back to Bethel. He finally goes to where he should have gone to in the first place. Let's pray together. Lord, it's so easy to go into denial and skip all the hard work of talking and listening to you, our relationship to you. If we're married, we need to talk and listen to each other. We need times and habits where we do that. If we have a family, we need times where we're in the buggy going down the road singing as loud as we can. We need the support of people who are trying to do the same thing that we're doing, like the different groups and activities that we have here at church. We need to come together on Sunday. We need those strong habits of once a week remembering who we are as your people and what our role is in this world and who we are as families. We come together as families, as friends. We sit, we sing. We ponder your word. We get encouraged for the week. Lord, we need these habits in our lives, or we become like Jacob and we just let things go. We don't take responsibility, and we blame everyone else for all the troubles that are happening. We need the church habits, family habits, getting together habits, going camping together habits, having fun together habits, being your church. And help us, too, to be a part of the broader church, the kingdom, what you're doing all around the world. We're part of what is happening in Africa and Asia and all around the world. People that are following you in India. We're brothers and sisters, and together we're trying to bring about your kingdom. And we can withstand some of the pressures of the world because we're part of this thing. We're not doing this on our own. And so our tendency is to go and do our own thing and build our own kingdoms, build our own shelters for our own livestock. Lord, help us to get this kingdom perspective. Help us to take our relationships and the people around us seriously and our role in them. And we need your grace. We need your spirit in us, those fruits that we've been talking about this whole summer. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, self-control. We need those fruits of the Spirit to do this. We pray for that. In Jesus' name, amen. This time the offering will be taken. If you're new visiting with us, we have a little slip. You can fill that out and put that in the basket as it goes around. And we're going to sing, which psalm?
Psalm 139, 23.
Psalm 139, about letting God lead us. Why don't you stand as we do all three things, or two things, singing, standing, and offering. Join us for a little fellowship through the double doors. And if you need prayer, please come to the front and enjoy your last shot at summer today. School starts tomorrow.
And please try and take a minute.
School starts for those of you that have kids. For those of us whose kids are out the door, those of you who don't have any kids, it's party time for the next month.
Yeah.
Kids are back.
Go find somebody you've never met before and say hi.
Thank you.